So in my previous build video, we went over a Pulverized Druid build for Season 9 that was incredibly strong as a starter build once you get into the end game. And in this build video, we're going to be going over an altered version of that is seeming to be the strongest Druid build of this season. And in terms of gear, compared to that previous build and this build, we're actually only switching up one piece and we're using one more unique now. And this is going to be a poison landslide build, so a majority of our damage is going to be poison damage, and we get to scale that a lot more. But the three uniques we're using is still Vasili's Prayer. This is primarily for stats. We also get some Fortify, and we can use some Earth skills while in Grisly Rage, which will be in a majority of the time. We're using Insatiable Fury. Again, this is primarily just for massive stat increases, massive defensive and offensive increases. This will be changed out once we can start getting our mythics. Then our newest change to this build compared to the old one that actually changes up how you play the build a lot is the new unique of Season 9, Rotting Lightbringer. Now the special of this is if no puddle is around you, Pulverize forms a puddle that guarantees its own overpowers and deals some amount of its normal damage as poisoning over 7 seconds. So that's a lot there, but essentially if you pulverize the ground and you're not standing in a pre-existing puddle created by your Pulverize, it'll create this poison puddle. It's pretty big. That's just dealing poison damage over time, and it stays for 7 seconds. Now, the guarantee overpower is actually quite weird because when you pulverize to create the puddle itself, that hit isn't guaranteeing the overpower, which is quite weird in how this card actually says it works. But the second part of this is where the guarantee overpowers come in. So pulverizing causes all of those puddles you've created to splash for some amount of their total damage within their areas and around them. So essentially, all of these poison puddles you're creating, when you pulverize and you're somewhat close to them, they will splash out a bunch of additional poison that deals some amount of their total damage, but those splashes of the poison puddles are what are guaranteed overpower. So let's say you're on a boss and you have 3 puddles created on the ground, which you can actually have a lot more than 3, and you pulverize again and all of those puddles splash these additional splashes. All of those splashes will be guaranteed overpowers. And this also gets really crazy when you could just have a bunch of puddles and then you spam pulverizes, and each puddle can pulverize multiple times because it sends out a bunch of these small splashes. Each one of those is a guaranteed overpower. So it actually gets really ridiculous in terms of how many overpowers you can put out. And it gets even more ridiculous when we have so many different things to just scale with our damage, to scale with our overpowers, because even though overpowers were nerfed really heavily going into Season 9, which they needed, our overpowers are still ridiculously strong. So that's primarily how you're going to be using this. You're really going to want to be actively moving around because you can't be standing directly in the middle of a puddle to create a new one. You can still be somewhat in a puddle and create a new one though. And keep in mind, there seems to be an internal cooldown on creating these puddles. I think it's like 1.5, maybe 2 seconds. I think it's more close to like 1.5 seconds, it seems, where it won't let you create a new puddle instantly. But you'll get pretty used to it as you're playing with this, and it's just ridiculously strong. But that brings us to our skill tree. We have 1 point in them all, 1 point into the upgrade. This is primarily to get lower in the tree. We will be keeping it on our bar in this version of the build because sometimes, more specifically on bosses, you can actually run out of spirit. That will be generally fixed as we get some better gear later down the road. And then we're going down to our Pulverize, the main damaging ability, 5 points into this. Upgrade 1, Pulverize now deals increased damage to crowd controlled and bosses. And then upgrade 2, every 10 seconds, Pulverize is guaranteed to overpower and makes enemies take increased damage from you. Then we have 1 into Earthern Bulwark, which is just a big barrier. We're going to be unstoppable 100% of the time in Grisly Rage, so we don't need upgrade 1, and we're able to use this while in Grisly Rage, and this will be resetting a bunch because of one of our aspects, so just a big defensive. We have 1 into Blood Howl, which is primarily to shapeshift us. Upgrade 1, getting kills reduces Blood Howl's cooldown, and hitting bosses reduces it. This is primarily to shapeshift us to stack up a buff. Then we're taking Debilitating Roar, a damage reduction to enemies around us. Upgrade 1 fortifies us. Upgrade 2 increases our damage while it's active, which is the main reason we're really taking it. Then we're going all the way down, 5 points into Grisly Rage. This is massive. We're going to be able to be in Grisly Rage 100% of the time if we're in combat. So Grisly Rage just gives us massive damage increases and damage reductions that stack up the longer we're in it. Kills extend the duration of this, and we can pretty much be in 100% of the time. When we put 5 points into this, we also gain 30% increased armor while it's active, so it allows us to not need as much armor from other areas. Upgrade 1, we're unstoppable all the time on Grisly Rage, so we're basically unstoppable 100% of the time. Upgrade 2, you fortify 8% of your max life per second while in this, which gives us pretty much all the fortify we need as well. Then that brings us to our passives. 1 into Heart of the Wild to get 3 into Wild Impulses. Your core skills cost more, but deal increased damage. 3 into Iron Fur, so damage reduction while in Werebear and 3 seconds after. Then we have 3 into Touch of Fortitude for increased resistances. If you have max out resistances, you can take these out and put them, say, more into Vigilance, which gives you damage reduction after using a defensive. Then Backlash, increased damage after using a defensive as well, which you can have up a lot of the time, so just a big damage increase. 3 into Nature's Reach, deal increased damage to distant enemies and more damage if they're CC'd. 3 into Feral Aptitude, deal increased damage while healthy and increased damage while above 100% move speed, and those bonuses will stack. 3 into Mending, this is primarily for the massive max life increase. 3 into Provocation, so after 10 seconds in Werebear, you will overpower on your next skill and you deal increased damage. 3 into Crushing Earth, Earth skills deal increased damage to CC'd enemies. 3 into Stone Guard, while you have Fortify over 50% of your max life, we deal increased damage. 1 into Neurotoxin, to get 3 into Envenom, you and your companions deal increased crit damage against poison enemies. Everything will be poison. Then 3 into Toxic Claws, we just deal increased poison damage, which is pretty massive. Then 3 into Defiance, nature skills deal increased damage to elites. 3 into Natural Disaster, so our earth skills deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. And then 3 into Quick Shift, shapeshifting into a new animal form stacks up this damage boost, but this doesn't have a duration when you're in an animal form. So what you're actually going to do during your gameplay is you're going to use your Bloodhowl and your Pulverize to shapeshift back and forth. Then once you get 6 stacks, which is the most stacks of Quick Shift, you're going to Grizzly Rage, and then you're going to just stay in Grizzly Rage the whole time. And because of our chest piece that keeps us in Werebear, the only way you can really lose stacks while in combat is if you interact with something that takes you into human form. So if you're, say, interacting with an object somewhere in a dungeon or something, make sure you use like a Pulverize right after, or your Quick Shift stacks will drop off. And then for our Capstone, Urzine Strength, get massively increased life, massively increased damage, massively increased overpower damage, basically 100% of the time. And then we have our Paragon boards, and like always, you can find a build planner in the description if you want to follow point by point. This is by no means a final version. I don't even have a 5th board yet, but this has been pretty decent so far. So board 1, we're using Tracker, which gives you increased poison damage, and the secondary poison effects last 40% longer. Our poison over time can actually deal a lot of damage. Board 1 is going to be Survival Instincts. While in Werebear form, you deal increased damage, or even more damage when full life, and you deal increased overpower damage based upon the life difference between you and the enemy. So as you stay high and they get lower, you deal more overpower damage. The glyph we're taking is Earth and Sky, so bonus to magic nodes that's in range. The secondary nature skills deal increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies, so we get a bunch of max life, a bunch of damage increases from this. The legendaries increase nature magic damage. Then you can either go left or right first, doesn't really matter, but I would generally recommend going to the right first because we're taking the Ancestral Guidance board. After you spend 75 spirit, deal increased damage, and that'll be up just a lot of the time. But going up to that, you can also get these rare and magic nodes that give you spirit on kill. So 1 spirit on kill, 3 spirit on kill, then 4 spirit on kill. And this will allow you to not really have to care about spirit until you're on a boss, because we can kill big groups of enemies pretty easily with this build. So you'll pretty much always have all the spirit you need. Then the glyph we're taking is Spirit. So increased critical strike damage. The secondary, when you crit enemies, they take increased damage from you, stacking up. The legendary is increased critical strike damage. Then we're going all the way to the left. We're taking the Heightened Malice board. While an enemy is poisoned near you, deal increased damage. This stacks up to 4 additional enemies, so massive damage increases just for poisoning enemies. The glyph we're taking is Bane, so you get increased poison damage, and then secondary, poison effects have a 15% chance to double the damage they deal over the duration. Again, we have pretty good poison dot effects, and then increased poison damage as the legendary. And then that brings us to our spirit boons. We're taking Gift of the Stag, so gain 30 max spirit and you gain 10 spirit every second. This is actually a pretty big piece of our spirit generation. That's just a lot of spirit every second. Then we're using Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage, Iron Feather for increased max life. Now you can go into Sight Talons. It may actually be better damage. I'm not exactly sure yet. At some point, as you say upgrade all of your gear and get better rolls, you probably won't need the crit chance, but Iron Feather is also just a massive survivability increase, and it gives you more damage off Overpower and other things, so I just take Iron Feather instead. Then Calamity, extend the duration of your ultimate by 35% for a Grizzly Rage. Then Obsidian Slam, every 6 casted attack will cause your next Earth skill to overpower. More overpowers is always better. And then that brings us to our seasonal powers. So for our catalyst, we're using Celestial Surge. So this will spawn a rune, pulls everything in, and just drops these stars everywhere that deal damage. We're using the Corrosive Vapor Infusion, which turns it all into poison damage, and enemies hit by it take poison damage over time. So just more poison damage. This will scale up a lot when we're actually in combat. This will be dealing quite a lot of damage. It'll also deactivate vampiric effects, so that can help later into the game or in higher pit runs. Then the Arcana we're using is Sap and Croc. Your catalyst applies vulnerable for 8 seconds. This won't be as consistent as some other effects, especially when you're, say, mobbing or just going quickly through enemies. But if there's anything that's actually tanky enough to survive you for a while, you'll be able to apply vulnerable to them pretty easily. And then we have a Bloody Charm. Our catalyst gains an execute for enemies below 20% life. Just doesn't work on bosses. And if things get executed by our Celestial Surge, it reduces our cooldown by 2 seconds. Then Shifting Powder. When we use our catalyst, we gain 70% movement speed while our Celestial Surge is dropping all the stars, and then for 5 seconds after. So this will just give us massive movement speed almost 100% of the time. And then for our mercenaries, we're using Subo as our actual mercenary primarily for the upgrade to Molotov, which when enemies are hit by it, they take 30% increased damage from overtime effects from you for 3 seconds. So especially on bosses, this will be pretty good. Then we're taking Snipe and Incinerary both. So if Subo's Snipe hits the target he originally aimed at, a Molotov explodes on them, which will again make them take more damage over time from us. So this is more specifically for bosses, which Pulverizes have always had an issue on, or more of an issue than just mobbing. That's still the case, but we're much better on bosses now, and this will help quite a bit. Then the reinforcement we're using is Variana. Use Bloodthirst, which will just give us increased attack speed while it's active, and put on Pulverize. So just random bouts of increased attack speed. But that brings us into our gear. Let's start off with our gems. Now in your armor, you're going to want increased willpower. That's going to be multiplicative damage. So once you start using runes and getting the runes you want, you're going to want to make sure to have runes on your weapon because you can't put willpower on your weapon and then one of your armor pieces. I'm still just using one set of runes. I haven't gotten the other set specifically I want, but I'm using Cast a non-channeled core skill. That will give us increased crit up to 25%. This is going to be really good and something you pretty much always want to use. 25% crit. It allows you to roll some additional things on your gear, and it'll be up 100% of the time because we just cast one Pulverize and it gives us a stack of this, so it'll always be up. And then for our seasonal jewels, I'm currently using You Gain Increased Primary Core Stat, Max Life, and are Unhindered. That can spawn the Jewel Guardians when you're in dungeons or against bosses. The Jewel Guardians really aren't much of anything. They're just some elites you have to kill. They're not really that big of a deal. You can also switch this out for another one. The other jewel that gives you permanently increased damage over time on an enemy every time you deal that damage over time. That may actually be better once you're getting into, say, boss farming, or specifically when you're in like higher tier pits, because the boss at the end is going to be more difficult for you, and that will actually help you kill it over time. But then the other jewels we're using is you deal more elemental damage, but take more. This will just be a lot more poison damage. Then we're taking your catalyst skill, deals 33% weapon damage of your infusion's element over 3 seconds. So this will just be a way we poison enemies a lot and deal more damage. And a lucky hit, dealing damage of your infusion's element, which is poison, so it'll be like all of our damage, has up to a 33% chance to trigger its secondary effect, which is basically just raining down more stars on enemies. And because of the changes they made to the scaling of seasonal powers, they actually go off of your Paragon levels now once you get to your Paragon levels. So as you keep going up more Paragon, your catalyst will keep doing more and more damage. So it'll actually be good damage based upon that. And then that brings us to our legendary aspects, starting with our necklace. So this is of Rabid Bearer. While Grizzly Rage is active, your direct damage is converted into poison damage. You deal massively increased poison damage and you passively spread rabies. So this is a big thing where all of our damage is pretty much converted into poison, and spreading rabies is actually pretty good. Rabies, because of our poison damage increases, actually deals decent damage, and I do want to test going into rabies and how that will scale with this. But then our other offensive aspects, Pulverize creates a shockwave that travels forward, dealing some amount of its damage to enemies in its path. Normally, Pulverize is just a circle on the ground. This gives the big shock wave as well to deal a ton more damage and give you a lot more range. Then we have the duration of Grizzly Rage is increased by up to 10 seconds. In addition, crits while in Grizzly Rage increase your critical strike damage up to 100%, so just a ton more critical strike damage during its duration. Then our final offensive aspect is your core skills deal up to 75% increased damage based on your Fortify, so just massive multiplicative damage increase. And then finally, for our last legendary aspect, we have Pulverize is now also an Earth skill. After it overpowers, your Earth skill cooldowns are reduced by up to 1.5 seconds. This is primarily for Earthen Bulwark, so we'll be able to use that a lot and reset it. Also, I did forget to go over my 4th unique, which is to Bolt's Will. The big reason for this is because even though this is like a good stat increase from its specific effect, if you want to be more tanky, you don't really need to Bolt's Will. To Bolt's Will, again, it's a decent damage increase. If you want to be a lot more defensive, you can just go Legendary Legs and get a lot more defensive aspects out of it, and you're not losing a ton of damage. The main reason you use this is because you have increased damage while unstoppable, which were always unstoppable in Grizzly Rage. So it'll just be up all of the time. And the affix rolls on this are decent, but again, you could be a lot more tanky if you use Legendary Legs, if that's what you want. And again, there'll be a build planner in the description for the best rolls for all of the gear. There's not actually a ton of super important rolls. You will need some resist all rolls. Even if you're super high Paragon, I think you'll still need resist all rolls on your boots and one of your rings, because we just don't have a ton of other things that give us increase to all resistances. And with the jewels for the season, we get all resist to that. So we can't say go into our Paragon boards and get a bunch of poison resist, then fill out our jewelry with resistances specifically to other things, because we want so it gives all resist. So we're kind of just stacking up all resist this season to get all resistances. You will also be able to get pulverized size on a bunch of your temp rings this season, which is a new added thing. So that will be nice to be able to just hit everything on your screen. Now on your necklace, if you can get it, you want Toxic Claws and Envenom. I have Toxic Claws, haven't been able to roll Envenom, and then pretty much everything else is just going to be base rolls. But that's pretty much the entirety of this poison pulverized build. This is incredibly fun and incredibly strong. I think this is the best version of pulverized we've ever gotten. It has a bit more interesting effects with our new unique weapon. We're replacing all these puddles and splashing them to deal guaranteed overpowers, and we're just super tanky. We're always unstoppable. We deal massive AoE damage, and now we're actually decent against bosses. So I think this is the strongest druid build of the season, and it's incredibly fun in my opinion. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.
Be crushed like the insects you are. Seeing is deceiving. Fall into darkness.